Please allow me to now welcome to the podium the Honorable Matt Brantley to share his remarks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And protocols have been established, and so I need not take up time with that. I must confess that having listened to the various experts, that one may be driven to a stage of depression here in St. Kitts and Nevis. It seems sometimes as we look at the scale and scope of the problem that we almost conclude that it is beyond our capacity to solve. Thankfully, there are those of us who do not agree that it's beyond our capacity. And I'm grateful and would wish to publicly commend the Prime Minister for his approach in involving this all of society. I have said and consistently said that crime is a social problem. Crime is not a political party issue. It is not a government issue. And as I believe we've heard from the experts this morning, law enforcement cannot solve crime on its own. There is the ongoing sense that whenever a crime occurs, there are some who blame the government, blame the police, but they're not prepared to assist the government or to assist the police. I have made the observation that whenever crimes occur in major countries in the world, one of the first things that law enforcement does, they put it out on the media and they ask for the help of the population. It tells me that law enforcement, even in the most sophisticated countries in the world, rely heavily on the involvement of the public. We have a public that says it's not our problem. Let the police do their work. Let the Prime Minister do his work. And that, I think, is part and parcel of the difficulty that we have sometimes, because we can see sometimes things happening and we refuse to engage. I don't propose to be long because I'm not an expert, and I believe that the purpose of this consultation is exactly that, to consult. And so your views and opinions are what people are here to collect. I, however, find is that in this discussion that we've had thus far this morning, there's a group of people whom I don't think have been mentioned, and perhaps as we drill down, we will get into that group of people, but I call them the enablers. You see, it is one thing to measure the gang members, those who self-report or those who, by ticking various boxes, you determine are gang members. But my sense is that there's a cohort of persons out there who provide the enabling environment, where the drugs and the guns and the being hidden. Some of them who might be doing the driving or doing the setting up. And sometimes we might be surprised as to who those individuals might be. They're not necessarily the ones sitting on the block with the sagging pants. They're not necessarily the ones smoking and behaving in any unruly fashion. But they are very much part and parcel of the problem. So I believe that any intervention program must also seek to identify those individuals and see how we can address in a fulsome way the involvement of this larger group of what I call the enablers. I'm sure the experts may have better language than me, but I'm using that term so that you could understand the point that I'm trying to make, that there are individuals involved. And I know this because as a politician, I engage with all sectors of my constituency and my community. And I sometimes wonder, well, where are individuals in the criminal class getting their data from? Where are they getting their intel from? And they have very good intel a lot of times, and they're getting it from people like you and me sometimes. And so we have to question ourselves sometimes as to what our own role might be in relation to crime and violence in our country. The other thing that stood out for me from this presentation is that the majority of our violent crimes, the majority of our homicides are being committed with guns. It is perhaps trite to say that we don't produce guns in the Caribbean. And I believe for far too long the United States has been given a pass. The US has become the main source of weapons, handguns in our region. And I believe that more needs to be said and more needs to be done by us as a Caribbean region to say to our brother and friend, the United States, that whatever your views may be on guns, and your right to carry guns and your right to own guns, that your guns and the freedom that you express through owning and carrying is having an effect in our societies. Too many guns are making their way into our region, and I believe that law enforcement would agree that those weapons are largely, in large measure, coming from the United States of America. And so I'm happy that USAID is involved, because as USAID looks at our gang problem, USAID must also look at what the United States is doing to contribute to that problem that we're having. You know, there may have been gangs from time immemorial, but if all the gangs could do is throw stones and bottles, the homicide rate would be a lot lower. But the fact that the gangs have access to weapons, and more high-powered weapons, it tells me, therefore, that we need also to look at some strategy that puts more pressure on the United States to control the flow of weapons into our region. You know, I have engaged with colleagues in the US, and they have spent an inordinate amount of money in our region in the war against drugs, for example, in trying to prevent drugs and trying to prevent illegal immigrants coming into the United States. And I've often said to them that you appear to be more interested in what's coming in and very uninterested or disinterested in what's going out. And I think that we need to see the same rigor. We need to see the same controls in terms of what's leaving the United States, because a lot of these weapons that we're getting are coming straight from the United States. So I think that we need that foreign policy initiative we need as a CARICOM region, because all of us across the Caribbean archipelago are suffering from the same problems. We definitely need to engage with the United States and put the ball back in their court in relation to their own contribution to this problem that we are experiencing. I am not saying that to deny the cogency or relevance of all the other factors that have been raised here. I think that all of those factors are important, and it tells me that we have a tremendous amount of work to do. I will make one last point, and that has to do with consistency. It is true that as a people we tend to react to the latest crisis. Over the years, whenever the homicide rate drops, and you've seen the graphs, we tend to go quiet. Things are good. Whether it's peace or whatever we want to call it, not many homicides. And people start to pat themselves on the backs and congratulate themselves that they're doing well. And then the following year, we see an upsurge where one homicide then triggers sometimes several others. The truth is that St. Kitts and Nevis has been here before. St. Kitts and Nevis has had consultations before. St. Kitts and Nevis has had reports and roadmaps that have been done before. But we have not been consistent in terms of our approach. We have not been consistent in following the recommendations, in engaging in the interventions. And I say that because I want the message to go very clearly to the Honorable Prime Minister and his team who are leading this effort, that we ought not to be gathered here and consulting again in 2024 in vain. It has to be that if we are going to be serious about tackling and confronting this problem once and for all, that whatever this leads to, whatever recommendations that come forward, that we once and for all decide that we will follow this path, and that we won't see a change in government that comes from time to time, and that change in government then abandons what we started, and then we wait until the problem gets again to a crisis level, and then we say, let us have some more consultation. I think it's important that whatever the lessons learned, whatever we can get from the report from USAID, whatever we can get from these consultations, that we implement and that we are consistent in our implementation of the solutions. I don't think that criminals are born. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, I may be wrong. I feel that people, in large measure, come out of a particular environment. I also feel that the best time and the most opportune time to get people in hand are when they're young. It's very hard when a man is already 20 or 21 set in his ways to say you're going to correct him at that point. But arguably, if you can get them at 5 and 6 and 8 and 9. So I am hopeful that as we build out this response, that we're going to see our schools involved. We're going to see our youth involved. I look across the audience here, and I don't see many people who can say they're young. Some may say so, but it may not be so. So we really need, I think, to see the youth engaged, because ultimately, this future that we're talking about is for them. And so they need to be engaged. We need to understand from their perspective what causes this 11-year-old that Mr. Sipasad, I think his name is, spoke about, to have such rage in him at that young age. And I would really like to see this consultation extended to our youth, because I believe that is where the intervention arguably may work best if we are to beat this problem and if we are to make a difference in our country. So I end by thanking all of you for being here. I thank Senator Iselin Phillip, who is co-chair of this effort, and the Prime Minister, who's not here today, but nevertheless, I'm sure he'll have a report on what happened here today. That the island of Nevis is committed to this undertaking. We're committed to consultation. We're committed to developing ideas. I look across this room. I see people with expertise that they can offer. I'm hopeful that those in authority will listen. And then once a plan is formulated, that plan will be implemented and that will be consistent. Crime, you see, is not a political issue. It is not a political issue because there's no politician out there who can solve crime. I would like to remind people that when I look in my Bible, Cain killed Abel, and that was a long time ago. So we have had the tendency of man to do bad things from a very long time. And so crime must be seen by all of us as a social issue. And if it's a social issue, it means that it troubles all of us, it impacts all of us. And if that is the case, it means, therefore, that whatever plan is developed now must be a long-term strategy. It must be a long-term plan. It must be a plan that successive governments, however constituted, will say, let us implement, because we've had buy-in to this plan. And the reason I say that is because sometimes I travel and I go to countries. I've been to China, for example, Singapore, places like those, and they tell me they have a 50-year plan. I say, 50 years? Here we're lucky if we plan for 2 years. 50-year plan. What that tells you is that whoever comes, this is the direction that they hope that they will go in for this period of time. So my suggestion is that as we develop a plan, we get the buy-in from all the stakeholders, it becomes our national plan that can then be implemented and done so consistently, regardless of change of authority and commissioner of police and DPP and all of these things, but consistently applied so that we can get the results that our country needs. My desire, ladies and gentlemen, is to see no more bloodshed. When I look at the statistic that the average age of those dying in gang-related violence is 27, I think that's what I took away from that slide. You imagine a young man at 27, how much he could have offered to St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of our development. Think about yourself where you were at 27. Some of us at that age are still finding out who we are and where we want to go. And when we think of the hundreds, because that's the number now, of youngsters that we would have lost, we understand that we would have lost significantly in terms of our sustainable development. And so I wish this consultation well. I'm hopeful that people will be open and forthright with their views, and that we may be able to engage at all levels. I see members from the church, I see members from education, I see members from law enforcement. I want to recognize Dr. Glenn Griffin, Nevis, who I met yesterday and told me he has come back home, and I welcome home. And so many who have a contribution to make. I also see the politicians. They're good, but you know, they come and go. So the important people in the room are the ones who have the expertise, the churches, the ones who invested in this community. And I want to hear those views and opinions, and hopefully we can shape a model that can become a model for our region. St. Kitts and Nevis may be small, but we can do great things if we do it together. Thank you very much, and I wish the consultations every success.